Okay, so we're going to get started again. We're going to do a little award ceremony. And then JSP and I are going to kind of think about what we did talk about and what we didn't talk about.
All right. So hello, my name is Andrew Schrock. I'm a research assistant and PhD candidate, and I've been helping out this last semester and the semester before with the Crunch Challenge. And I don't know, I was really just impressed with the caliber of the presentations. A lot of the students, I think it needs to be mentioned, they already have busy schedules. These are really their passion projects. These are things that they really wake up thinking about and they can't stop thinking about, and they just feel a need to work on and do and pursue. So I think all three were qualitatively successful in their own right. That said, there was one that received the majority of votes. But before I get to that, I also just want to say thank you for everyone in the audience and all the participants out there. All of you who at lunch took time out from your conversations to listen and give really detailed feedback to the students. And I think that's really important, and we certainly value that, and it's indicative of the kinds of relationships we'd like to foster between students at USC and industry partners. So, without further ado, the winner is Ganu. That's your signal to come up here and receive your certificates. We don't have any large novelty-sized checks, but we do have some very nice awards.
So John, come on up. As most of you know, JSP has been the chairman of our advisory board since the beginning of the lab and is really the man who helped us think through a lot of these issues. And so I want him to talk first and, kind of say maybe what we didn't cover or whatever.
So initially I was supposed to summarize, and after hearing my master friend over here and the way he summarizes, I said, no way. But I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on things that I did not hear that much, that I would have expected to hear more of. Now granted, I have been looking more at the reinvention of retail and not the reinvention of media. And yet, both in retail and media, the fundamental thing that's driving us, in fact, I think a fundamental thing driving IBM as well, is this notion of systems of engagement. Now, basically the whole question is how do you move from a transaction-oriented point of view to a relationship architecture, so to speak. And those of us that build enterprise systems know how to do that at one level. Everything we're talking about today, I think, also comes back to rethinking what are the kinds of relational architectures, systems of engagement you can create around your media. So, for example, if you want to think about what may lie under certain types of engagement, let's take Kickstarter, something talked about a great deal. Now, I don't know about you folks, but when I do invest in a Kickstarter program, actually I have a great deal of fun following it and seeing if it's going to pass it up. And I mean, we reach the goal. And what happens afterwards? It becomes kind of a form of engagement that I have. I often don't expect to get much, but it's kind of like being an angel investor, which you screw up quite often. That there's a sense of participation through that act that I think actually creates a fair amount of meaning in one kind of slice of this type of game. You know, the second kind of component, I feel silly saying this in front of Henry, but you know, I like to think about transmedia is not a question of how do you reach across and jump across multiple media, but how do you bring the consumer into the circuit in a brand new type of way? So which ways are the consumers adding information in terms of the transmedia back channels, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know how many of you are engaged in Hunger Games, but, I happen to be a member of District 2. And, there was a kind of engagement there that actually gives you phenomenal insight to what particular clients or customers are actually thinking about. So if you really want to think about how do you want to radicalize predictive analytics, counting eyeballs is a pretty narrow channel to look through. And so how do you open up that channel? For example, how do you at least look at how long they do watch, where they do break, how do you use where they break away as a kind of an interesting signal about something? There's a lot more information out there than you might first kind of think about. And likewise, if I move up to where I also spend maybe the wrong amount of time, World of Warcraft, you got to kind of recognize that the game is the game, but what makes the World of Warcraft so captivating is not, I hate to say the game, it's the social life around the edge of the game. It's the knowledge economy around the edge of that game. You got to realize that if you want to be a high-end raider, you and your guild or your sub-raid team, have to basically process somewhere between 10 to 15,000 new ideas a night. You can't do that as individuals. You start building tools, you start building subgroups. It is a knowledge economy out there. There's a kind of engagement that universities are still trying to replicate. And there's some kind of new forms of engagement I think we're really talking about here. So I think there's kind of the issues of kind of how we got to look at the back channels and and how to kind of get more information out of them. In terms of predictive analytics, and we're looking at kind of an issue which is not media, but the whole notion of can I look at certain bursting trends in fashion in different parts of the world? If I have access to all that information, then can I actually do a remix of that? And might I actually use a genetic algorithm to be able to predict something that nobody's yet thought about? Well, there's the fundamental assumption here is that basically that you could never do kind of a generative act by machine, that it must always be done by human. It's kind of implicit in this, and also implicit in the cost structures. And so I think one of the opening slides started with Digital Emily, and with you, Bill. It is getting to be amazing what we can do with computational powers. And I think that it's well worth kind of really understanding that we're still just scratching the surface of what this game may be. And finally, let me just say that, what I really loved, Alicia, one of your opening comments, is that most people do not have mental models of privacy. That's all there is to it. And how do we actually advance those notions of mental models? Might there be fundamentally new ways to actually think about privacy? We talked about a couple. We did not talk about ID cubed, which is a new kind of stack that runs in the cloud. That could be a very interesting thing to join to the Qualcomm phone. There may be ways to do both of those things together. So I really think that we're going to be looking at new forms of wrappers, and those wrappers may have a length of time on them, so that maybe you get to use my data for a certain amount of time, and after that, everybody loses access to it. There's some fairly interesting technical things, and I say this because, for better or for worse, and somewhat by accident, I had to admit, my group at Park is the ones that invented DRM. We hold the patents on DRM, we sold them. And believe it or not, we did that initially with a bank. And the idea was we would have these packets, which are the DRM wrappers, actually be able to carry financial transactions all automatically in the background. So it would be an entire financial clearinghouse at the same time, built into the wrapper. And that whole sense of how do you start thinking about wrappers differently than just on-off. And having natural life periods to them, all this kind of thing, may actually change some of the technical tools we may bring to this arena. I think we're just scratching the surfaces here, and I sure learned a hell of a lot myself today.
Thank you, John. So where do we go from here? I think one of the things I just heard from John that's a challenge to us is to try and maybe marry some of the transmedia production capabilities that we've begun to build in the lab to the big data analytic capabilities so that both production and analytics become part of the way that you tell a story and that. And so those are two work streams that have kind of kept separate, and we're beginning to pull them together in the playground. But I think there's many other possibilities with the way we think about this notion of transmedia branding. And, you know, we just had an incredible half-day workshop at Levi's, I think in DUTAC, that was a kind of deep dive into transmedia branding. And we think we're beginning to get some ideas that really work. And we look forward to trying them out on some of the other companies here. And so our task from now is, we're going to produce fairly quickly a video of this day, which we will get to all of you. We're going to produce a little after action report, which we'll also get to all of you. And I think, you know, this was a big experiment on our part. We didn't know if it would work, but my sense is it did work. And it worked because you all really hung in here and were willing to play with the models. So I also think it worked, much thanks to our graphic artist who has and we will of course get you slides of all these incredible maps that we've created, and they will be up in the lobby of the Annenberg School also starting on Monday. So many thanks. Feel free to hang out and drink coffee and eat cookies for as long as you want, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.